After I turned down my manager's drink invite, I got dumped on the night shift with a creepy mentor who said I'd be blacklisted. So I followed every rule to the letter, let everything crash, then CC'd the whole mess to the board by mistake. The subject line of that email still haunts me. Project integrity concerns confidential. I stared at it for a good 10 seconds before I hit send. It was supposed to go to just one person, my department head, David. But my cursor slipped and somehow highlighted the entire board of directors. 20 minutes later, my Slack lit up like a damn Christmas tree. I leaned back in my chair under the dull blue light of the empty office. It was 2:17 a.m. The hum of the server room down the hall was the only sound. I could already picture David's reaction when he realized I had attached everything: screenshots, call logs, timestamps, HR tickets that mysteriously went missing, and the internal memos they thought I'd deleted from my folder. Everything started 2 months earlier, the night I told him no. David had been my manager for just under a year, mid-40s, slick, always smelling like whiskey and expensive cologne. When he invited me for a quick drink after work, I didn't think much of it until I saw how he looked at me across the break room. His tone shifted, casual turned personal. I smiled politely and said, "I don't mix work with drinks." The next morning, I wasn't on the day shift anymore. My name had been moved to the night schedule. My access level in our internal system was downgraded without explanation. And by Friday, I had a mentor named Kira, one of David's loyal shadows, who told me flat out, "Your attitude will get you blacklisted here." At first, I tried to shrug it off, but little things piled up. My reports got lost before meetings. My projects were reassigned. Clients I'd nurtured for months suddenly stopped replying to me. HR never responded to my complaint. Then one night, while combing through the shared drive, I found something that made my stomach twist. That was when I decided to obey, to follow every rule, to log every minute, and to let the system rot from within, just like they'd built it. When I hit send on that email, knowing full well who was in CC, I smiled for the first time in weeks, because the real explosion hadn't even started yet. The next morning, when I walked into work, people were whispering. David's office door was closed, but I could see movement inside: HR, legal, and one very pale-looking department head. My badge still worked, though, for now. And when I sat down at my desk, there was a new email waiting for me with just 2 words in the subject line. "We need to talk." I opened it and froze. It wasn't from David. It wasn't even from HR. It was from the CEO. And attached was a file I definitely hadn't sent. The file was titled, "Employee Incident Record Jenna Ruiz." That's my name. For a full minute I just stared at it. My pulse was hammering in my neck. The CEO, Elaine Carter, had personally emailed me this. I hesitated, then clicked. The document opened, and my jaw dropped. It was a compiled report of every performance issue I'd ever supposedly had. Late submissions, missed deadlines, even a note that I'd been seen engaging in inappropriate behavior with a client. None of it was true, but the timestamp on the file showed it had been created over a month ago, right after I declined David's drink. So this had been planned. That was when I realized what kind of machine I was working for. The company, an advertising firm in Austin called Brightline Creative, was built on image. Sleek offices, ping-pong tables, progressive policies plastered all over LinkedIn. But underneath that, it was run like a frat house with a dress code. When I first joined 2 years ago, I'd loved it. I was 27, eager, and naive enough to think good work spoke for itself. I'd landed a big account in my first quarter and even won an internal award. David had congratulated me personally. Back then, I thought he was just a supportive boss. Then little things started to stand out. How women who didn't play along got quietly moved to different teams. How the men's happy hours decided project leads. How HR was more of a rumor-controlled department than anything else. Still, I kept my head down. I thought if I worked hard, I could outrun the politics. Until that night in April, when David's drink invite turned into something colder. When I said no, he smiled, but it wasn't friendly. It was that smile people give when they're already deciding what they'll take from you. By Monday morning, I was on night shift under Kira's mentorship. Kira was a lesson in compliance. She was good, too good, at enforcing David's quiet punishments. She would say things like, "Let's not cause drama," or "You should really be grateful for the opportunity to grow." Every opportunity meant longer hours and more grunt work. But here's the thing, I listened. I observed. And I started documenting everything. I built a quiet archive on a personal encrypted drive, screenshots of Slack messages, call logs, calendar edits, audio snippets of Kira contradicting herself. Nothing illegal, just evidence of patterns. And then came the night that changed everything. I was assigned to audit old project folders for storage cleanup. Tedious work, usually ignored. But buried in one of David's project folders was a subfile named Training Material DocX. Inside were several email drafts between him and the company's HR head, drafts where they discussed how to control narrative risk by fabricating performance issues if an employee became a potential HR liability. My name was on one of them. I didn't breathe for a full minute. Then I copied the entire directory to my encrypted folder. That was the start of my quiet revenge. But I didn't know then how far up it went, or that someone else inside the company had already been watching me collect my little pieces of truth. The file the CEO sent me proved it. And by the end of that week, I would learn that I wasn't the first person David had done this to. I was just the first one who refused to stay quiet. It began with a feeling, that weird, prickling sense you get when someone's behind you, even if you can't see them. I'd been working the night shift for about 2 weeks at that point. The office was empty except for me, a flickering vending machine, and the janitor who always kept his earbuds in. Around midnight, while I was uploading client files, I noticed something strange. A folder I'd hidden inside a subdirectory, one only I should have known about, had been opened. The last accessed timestamp was from an hour earlier, while I'd been in the restroom. No one should have had my credentials. I clicked through everything, heart pounding. Nothing seemed missing, but when I checked the activity log, there it was. Someone had cloned my access session from a different IP, an internal one, meaning it came from inside the company's server. Someone was monitoring me. I should have panicked, but instead something in me went quiet. Cold, focused. If they were watching, I'd give them something worth seeing. I started behaving like the perfect employee, logged every task, emailed summaries, smiled through the fake mentorship sessions with Kira. Every time she said things like, "You don't want to make enemies here," I'd nod like I agreed. Behind the scenes, I went deeper. I found backup logs from the HR department that revealed deleted complaints, actual reports from women who had left the company. Their stories all had the same pattern. Late-night invites, performance issues, sudden resignations. One of those women had left just before I joined. Her name was Rachel Kim. I didn't think much of it until I opened one of the complaint PDFs and noticed something chilling. Rachel's final email before she resigned was addressed to the CEO, Elaine Carter. Elaine had known, and she'd buried it. That realization shook me. The CEO wasn't just negligent, she was complicit. It meant the file she'd sent me wasn't some mistake or misunderstanding. It was a warning. They were circling me, documenting me, building a case to fire me before I could expose them. So I flipped the script. I stopped storing evidence on the company's servers. I transferred everything to an external encrypted drive I kept in my car, inside a coffee cup with a false bottom. I also set up an automatic email trigger. If my account was deactivated, a file named BLC Internal Abuse Archive zip would auto-send to 3 external journalists and 1 attorney friend of mine. Kira started getting twitchy around me. I caught her peering over my shoulder a few times, and once she tried to casually ask if I'd been talking to anyone outside about work. I smiled. Just my cat. By week 3, things got tenser. David started showing up during night shifts to check progress. He'd linger behind my chair, pretending to read reports, while I could feel his breath on my neck. That's when I decided I wouldn't wait to be their next quiet casualty. I was going to burn their little empire down by using their own systems. I began writing a series of meticulously polite emails detailing procedural inconsistencies and audit irregularities, CCing HR and Kira on each one. They ignored me, of course, which was perfect, because every ignored message was another breadcrumb, another timestamp of negligence. All I needed was one spark to tie it all together. That spark came the night Kira slipped up, when she said something that made everything click. Something that made me realize David wasn't the one pulling the strings anymore. And that the real puppet master had been someone else all along. It happened on a Thursday night. The kind of night where the air in the office felt stale and wrong. Kira came in late, way past her usual check-in time. She looked nervous, almost jumpy. Her blazer was wrinkled, her lipstick smudged like she'd been biting her lip. She dumped her bag on the desk across from me and said, too casually, "You know, you should stop sending all those audit reports. It's not helping your case." "My case?" I asked, pretending not to know what she meant. She gave a thin smile. "Let's not play dumb, Jenna. Everyone knows you're trying to build something. It won't work, not this time. This time." That phrasing froze me. "What do you mean this time?" I asked. Her mouth twitched like she'd said too much. "Forget it," she muttered, then started typing like her life depended on it. But I wasn't going to let it go. I stood up, walked over, and said quietly, "Kira, what happened to Rachel Kim?" Her fingers stopped mid-keystroke. "Where did you hear that name?" she whispered. I stared at her. "You knew her, didn't you?" She looked at me then, really looked, and something flickered in her eyes. Pity, maybe, or fear. Kira exhaled hard and said, "Rachel didn't quit. She was forced out." She told me that Rachel had started gathering evidence about David's behavior and the company's cover-ups, just like I had. But before Rachel could take it to the press, HR had staged a meeting where she was accused of violating confidentiality by saving client data to a personal drive. She was fired the same day and escorted out by security. Kira's voice broke a little. "They called it a policy breach, but everyone knew it was David's order. Only, it wasn't just David." I narrowed my eyes. "Then who?" Kira hesitated. Then she said it. "Elaine, the CEO. She told HR to bury Rachel's file permanently, said it would damage morale." My stomach dropped. "And the worst part," Kira said, almost whispering now. "Rachel didn't disappear because of the firing. She disappeared because she wouldn't stop. She kept emailing reporters. And one night her car was found abandoned off I-35. They called it an accident." I stared at her. My throat felt dry. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying stop digging," Kira snapped, suddenly standing. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. This place protects its own." She grabbed her bag and left before I could say another word. I sat there alone, my computer screen still glowing, the cursor blinking at the end of an unfinished email. For the first time, I felt real fear, not just of losing my job, but of disappearing into that same quiet hole Rachel had fallen into. But right beneath the fear, something else burned hotter: rage. I opened the folder where I'd been collecting everything, every fake report, every deleted HR ticket, every audit log, and created a new master file labeled Rachel. I wasn't just exposing David anymore. I was going after Elaine Carter herself. I didn't know it then, but the moment I hit save, someone else logged into my system remotely. A new cursor appeared on my screen. And right in front of me, without touching a single key, the words started typing themselves. "We warned you once." Then the cursor blinked twice, and the screen went black. My computer stayed black for nearly a full minute. I just sat there staring at my own reflection in the screen, eyes wide, heartbeat like static in my ears. When it finally rebooted, everything looked normal again. But one folder, my Rachel folder, was gone. They wiped it remotely. That night I didn't go home. I packed my bag, walked straight out to my car, and sat there under the flickering parking lot lights for hours, replaying everything in my head. I'd underestimated how deep it went. They weren't just corrupt, they were untouchable. But the thing about systems like that, they're built on arrogance, and arrogance makes people sloppy, so I started planning. Step 1, get my evidence off their network permanently. Luckily, I'd made backups, multiple ones. I had encrypted copies stored on a cloud drive under a dummy company name, and another on a USB drive taped beneath the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet at home. Step 2. Find allies, but quietly. I remembered one person who might help me: Tom Reyes, a data analyst who'd quit Brightline a year earlier after a conflict with management. Rumor was he'd clashed with David over data manipulation. I found him on LinkedIn, messaged him, and within an hour he replied with, "You finally seeing how bad it is." We met the next day at a small coffee shop in East Austin. He looked older, tired, but sharper than ever. I showed him what I had. He whistled low and said, "This is worse than I thought. They've been scrubbing compliance audits for years." He leaned in. "If you want to hit them, don't go to HR or even the media first. Hit their money. The board won't care about moral corruption, but they will care about losing clients." That clicked instantly. The board. The same board that Elaine probably thought was asleep at the wheel. Tom helped me set up a mirrored reporting system. Using Brightline's own project management tools, we created fake status dashboards that looked legitimate but were actually tracking missed deliverables, altered invoices, and falsified time logs. Stuff we knew David's department had been hiding. Every fake number led to a real violation. Every timestamp told a story. I worked in silence for 2 weeks, pretending everything was fine. I smiled at Kira, responded to David's smug late-night check-ins, and logged every minute of it. By mid-May, I had enough to blow the lid off. That's when I drafted the email. It started off innocently, just like any audit summary. "Please review the attached documentation outlining internal compliance irregularities discovered during the Q2 review period." Then, I attached the master folder. Every doctored file, every deleted report, every piece of evidence of harassment and manipulation. My original plan was to send it to HR first, give them one last chance to fix it. But the more I thought about it, the more I knew they'd just bury it again. So instead, I wrote "confidential internal audit inquiry" in the subject line and typed the recipients. David, Kira, HR, and, most importantly, the board of directors. Then I paused, finger hovering over the send key. If I hit it, there was no going back. But before I could, a new email notification popped up from a sender I didn't recognize. Subject line, "You're making a mistake." The message was blank, except for one attachment. When I opened it, my breath caught in my throat. It was a video file, grainy security footage, from the Brightline parking lot. And in the frame, it was me, talking to Tom. My stomach dropped. The footage was clear enough to recognize both of us, me and Tom, sitting at that coffee shop table, leaning in close, talking. But the camera angle wasn't from inside the cafe. It was from across the street. They'd been following me. I checked the file details, time-stamped from 2 days ago, which meant they knew about Tom, about the meeting, about everything. A new email appeared in my inbox before I could even process it. Same unknown sender. This one said, "Stop now and we'll let you resign quietly. Keep going and you'll end up like her." No signature, no explanation, just a name in the attachment line, "Rachel exit zip." My hand actually shook as I double-clicked it. Inside were files that looked like personal HR records, but they were different. There were screenshots of Rachel's Slack messages, GPS data from her company phone, even copies of emails she'd sent after she was supposedly fired. The last one was dated 2 days before her car accident. She'd written, "Elaine, I have proof. You knew about the harassment, the falsified contracts, everything. If you don't respond by tomorrow, I'm going public." The message was addressed directly to Elaine Carter, the CEO. Rachel was dead 2 days later. I felt sick. My palms were sweating as I scrolled through the rest of the folder. There was a photo too, her car, crumpled on the shoulder of I-35. Police tape fluttering in the headlights. And then a text log. Rachel's last messages recovered from her phone backup. Rachel 9:27 p.m. I think I'm being followed again. Rachel 9:31 p.m. Elaine won't answer me. If something happens, check my Dropbox. Password is my middle name. That Dropbox still existed. It was locked, but I guessed the password after 3 tries, June. Inside was everything she'd been building. Internal memos, photos of physical documents, and one damning PDF labeled BLC Client Kickback Scheme. I opened it and felt my blood turn to ice. The document detailed a kickback system between David's department and a handful of preferred vendors. Fake overbilling, phantom clients, all quietly approved by Elaine to inflate quarterly numbers. They were defrauding not just clients, but the board itself. And Rachel had proof. That's why she'd been silenced. That's why I was next. I realized then that the email I'd just received wasn't a threat from HR or even David. It was from inside IT, someone cleaning up loose ends for Elaine. And if they had footage of me meeting Tom, then they probably had access to my car tracker, my phone, maybe even my home Wi-Fi. It was past 2 o'clock a.m. The office was silent except for the low hum of the AC. My computer fan kicked in, and for a second I thought it was the sound of footsteps. I unplugged my workstation, yanked the Ethernet cable out, and bolted. Tom called as I was pulling out of the parking lot. His voice was low, urgent. "Jenna, they came to my place. Some guy in a suit asking questions about company data. I'm out. I'm going underground for a while." I could barely breathe. "They have footage of us." "I know," he said. "And you're on their list now, but listen to me, Rachel had a failsafe. If you have her Dropbox, you have the key." "The key to what?" I asked. He hesitated, then, "To Elaine's real identity. She's not who she says she is." The call dropped. My car was the only one on the highway, headlights slicing through the dark. And as I drove, my phone buzzed with a final text from an unknown number. "You don't even know who Elaine Carter really is." I didn't sleep that night. I drove until sunrise, parked by a gas station outside San Marcos, and opened my laptop using a hotspot. I started digging into Elaine Carter. At first, everything looked polished: Harvard MBA, a decade of executive experience, philanthropic donations, a long trail of LinkedIn interviews about empowering women in tech. But something about her history felt off. Too clean, like it had been scrubbed. I cross-searched her past employers and found gaps: 2 unexplained years between 2013 and 2015. I pulled old IRS and SEC records, and that's when I found it. Her name didn't exist in any filings before 2015. Not under that spelling anyway, so I ran a deeper check. And there it was. Elaine Carter was an alias. Her real name was Elaine Cortez, former COO of a small marketing firm in Nevada that collapsed after an embezzlement scandal. Over $2.8 million in client funds misallocated. No one was ever charged because the company's financial data vanished right before the investigation. Guess who handled the IT at that firm? David. They'd worked together before. And just like at Brightline, the old company had one whistleblower, a woman named Rachel Kim, who'd been an intern there before moving to Austin. Rachel had known her from the start. Elaine wasn't just covering up harassment and corruption. She was rebuilding the same criminal system she'd already escaped once. Brightline was her second act, a polished front to clean dirty money through fake contracts and marketing partnerships. Rachel found the pattern and tried to expose it. And Elaine had her killed. When I pieced it all together, my hands went numb. The reason she'd sent me that employee record wasn't to warn me, it was to threaten me, to let me know she already had a file prepared for when she'd need to erase me too. And David, he wasn't the puppet master. He was just her tool. A useful distraction, the face of everyday toxicity while she quietly built her empire in the shadows. The board didn't know the truth, not fully. They saw the inflated revenue reports and thought she was a genius. They had no idea it was built on fraud, silenced employees, and a trail of destroyed lives. But the more I stared at the evidence, the colder I felt. Because buried in Rachel's Dropbox, I found one more file: a legal agreement between Brightline Creative and a shell corporation registered in Nevada. The signature on it wasn't Elaine's. It was mine, dated a year ago. Someone had forged my name onto contracts used in the laundering chain. If the truth came out now, Elaine could claim I was involved. She had already set me up to take the fall. Every performance issue, every suspicious access log, every late-night audit, it was all groundwork for a narrative. The rogue employee who'd tampered with client funds. I sat in that car watching the morning light crawl across the windshield and realized the full, horrifying reason behind it all. Elaine wasn't just protecting her empire. She was building her exit strategy, and I was her scapegoat. The moment the walls closed in, she'd feed the board the proof of my forged signatures, claim she'd uncovered internal fraud, and walk away clean. Rachel had discovered that too late. I wasn't going to make the same mistake. I closed the laptop, stared out at the empty highway, and whispered to myself, if she wants to bury me, she's going to have to dig her own grave too. And that's when the plan for the final move, the real revenge, clicked into place. I picked my moment like you pick a lock, quietly, patiently, with a file the size of a hand grenade. Tom handled the technical side. He siphoned metadata, timestamps, and server logs that matched Rachel's Dropbox contents to Brightline's internal finance system. He pulled client names, invoice numbers, and the shell company chain from the scrubbed ledgers. It all fit together like a confession. I didn't send one single email that night. I sent 7. One went to the board, a clean packet with the forged contract trail, Rachel's I-35 notes, and Elaine's Nevada paper trail that linked her to the old embezzlement. I labeled it urgent. Legal and financial exposure, private. Another went to a longtime client of Brightline's with a simple note. You're being billed for work you never received. We have the contracts to prove it. A third went to a reporter I'd DM'd months earlier, someone who'd written about corporate fraud. The fourth landed in the inbox of an SEC whistleblower intake address. The fifth went to the one lawyer still willing to answer a midnight text from a stranger. If you don't move, they'll bury me. He moved. But the real trick, the part that made them panic like rats, was the version I sent to the CEO herself. I wrapped it in a formal, paranoid-sounding message. You knew this would come. You warned me. This is my binding confession for the board. I have included the files you used to frame me. If anything happens to me, these are released publicly at 02:00 a.m. tomorrow. I made sure that message routed through an auto-forward I'd set up days earlier to a dozen journalists and former employees. If Elaine touched me, the files would sprinkle across inboxes like poison. She called first. A number with no name. Her voice, colder than I expected, said, "You don't understand what you're doing." I laughed. I do. I understand how you think you can buy silence. I understand you also forgot one thing. People you bury sometimes know how to set fires. They scrambled. David swore he had nothing to do with the Nevada firm. Kira texted that she'd been threatened and begged me to stop. In the end, Kira did something I hadn't expected. She handed me an old HR export file that had been flagged for deletion last year, the file that showed Elaine personally signed off on several cover-ups. She told me, "You were always going to be the one who fought. I can't look at another woman in a box." The board convened an emergency meeting 2 days later. The morning after that, the press called. The SEC opened a preliminary inquiry. Major clients froze payments and demanded audits. Brightline stock, a small public outfit with the sort of investors who hate uncertainty, plunged. Elaine's face, the one we'd all seen on LinkedIn interviews and charity panels, was suddenly a header on 6 different exposes. She tendered a resignation that read like a hostage note. David was escorted out with cuffs I'd only seen on TV. Kira cooperated, and in return, walked away with a witness protection deal that made me feel guilty and vindicated at the same time. Tom got a contract job with a firm that paid him triple and made sure his name never appeared online with Brightline again. Rachel's name was spoken slowly in headlines instead of whispered in the break room. They tried to paint me as a rogue employee. Elaine's lawyers screamed forgery until their voices were hoarse. But I had more than papers. I had systems logs, backups, and a chain of custody Tom had made airtight. The board couldn't risk being the board that ignored a whistleblower and got burned, too much liability. They cut ties with the executives who'd let it happen and hired auditors who brought in the kind of legal teams that don't let things disappear. It didn't erase the holes they'd left in people's lives. I still dream about a car on the side of I-35 and the way the headlights made the rain look like knives. I still have nights where my apartment feels too quiet and I check the locks 3 times before I sleep. But I got something that mattered. The truth was loud enough to wake people who had been pretending not to hear. I walked away from Brightline with a settlement that paid for therapy and a new apartment near a river where the air isn't recycled. The board offered me a thank you and an NDA that smelled like a bandage. I signed a version that allowed me to speak about what happened without naming clients, enough to tell the story, not enough to let them bury Rachel again. On the day the indictments were announced, I sat on my balcony, coffee cold, and thought about the first night I'd said no to a drink. I thought about how one simple word had cost me months of sleep, but had finally given me silence of a different kind, the silence of a phone that no longer buzzed with threats. I still keep Rachel's Dropbox on a drive in my freezer. It's not about the revenge now. It's about a ledger of what happens when people trade human lives for profit. And as for Elaine, someone in the board leaked a voicemail she left for David, a clipped, brittle, utterly human thing where she said, "We do what we have to do." I saved it. Every time I want to remember why I fought, I play it and smile. The last thing I wrote in my private journal was simple and petty and perfect. Burn the pretty things, the weeds grow back faster. Jenna Ruiz.